I'm Nicholas Matthews. I'm a cinematographer and I shoot movies, commercials, and music videos.
Okay, awesome. Now, I saw earlier just on your Instagram story that you did not go to film school. Is that true?
Yeah, I got into filmmaking sort of in high school. I started shooting shorts and making things with friends, and then that led to I did go to college, but I ended up studying communications and I started making short I was kept making shorts while I was there and eventually did an internship in Los Angeles where I was worked as a PA on a movie, and then I was working with the art department and locations department, and ended up shooting a bunch of films then and directing, and kind of discovered that cinematography was my passion when I was doing that. And yeah, it took me probably 5 years after I was in college to actually move to Los Angeles and start a career as a cinematographer. Yeah, and I started with really just a reel. I had been shooting stuff for a worked at a nonprofit for a little while, and I was working while I was working there, I was shooting and lighting and sort of starting to, craft images and some stories. But when I moved to LA, I sort of just had a reel and a dream of what I wanted to do. So yeah, it was a very it's been I've been in Los Angeles for 10 years now, and it's definitely been a process. It started with very humble beginnings.
I'm sure. Now, you want to talk to me a little bit about what a director of cinematography does and what their responsibilities are?
Yeah, so the role of cinematographer or director of photography changes on every movie,
Mhm.
um, just as a result of how the director likes to work and what the director likes to do. And so I ended up, a director of photography, basically, your job is to take the director's vision and collaboratively um, develop a visual approach to a film or commercial or music video. And I'll mostly talk about just like feature films because that's kind of where I've spent most of my career and my work. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, so a lot of my job involves working with the director to design the shot list, and then I am testing cameras, lights, and designing what the images are actually going to look like. So I'll, be over in charge of composition, framing, lighting, camera movement in that sort of process. And some directors are more technical and some are more actor driven. So
Sure.
my role can kind of dance a little bit depending
Mhm.
on who I'm working with.
Okay.
So on a movie like Saw, Kevin is
Mhm.
a very collaborative director and he's a very technical director. So he comes from working as an editor. So mostly he's thinking a lot about what pieces of coverage do I need in order to tell the story. And
Mhm.
so a lot of my work on a project like that is working with Kevin to design the shot list in terms of how the camera moves, and we're talking through every scene and working through that. And then I'm weighing in on all, production design, I'm weighing in on wardrobe, I'm weighing in on costume. But principally I'm presenting tests to Kevin, and I was presenting, lens and camera tests to decide what is our lens package, what is our filter package, what is our camera package for this movie. And then I'm also testing lighting and colors and working with the production designer on, in that case it was Anthony Stabley, to design the color arc and color palette of the movie. And so it really is, Gordon Willis described the role of a cinematographer. Gordon Willis shot The Godfather, and a bunch of
Yeah.
other movies as a visual psychiatrist. You're someone that is subconsciously moving the audience through the film and painting pictures in the
Mhm.
dark. And it's that sort of idea, which is, the way that something is lit ultimately affects how we feel about things and ultimately affects the emotional response you have as an audience.
And then how did you originally get into the industry? And I know you talked about it just a little bit, and then your process moving to LA, and just what was all that like? And was cinematography what you originally wanted to do in the industry?
Yeah, when I first got interested in filmmaking, I think like a lot of people, I didn't know how many people it took to make movies.
Hmm.
And I knew the names of a few directors and I didn't know much else. And so when I first got interested in filmmaking, I just was interested in telling stories, and I thought I wanted to be a director and thought I wanted to be a writer. And then as I was making shorts, as I was making films, I actually remember distinctly like getting really excited about using a camera and using lights to kind of it can literally change an entire space how you shoot
Hmm.
it. And I think that is what sort of what got me excited. Really, the movie that got me interested in telling in filmmaking itself was David Lynch's second movie, The Elephant Man, because I'd
Okay.
been very interested in literature, and then I saw
Hmm.
that film, and it felt so literary and beautiful as a film. And so, yeah, so cinematography was something I discovered a little later on, more in college,
Okay.
uh, and then for me, that meant when I moved to Los Angeles, I really didn't know what to do and how to go about
Mhm.
it. But at that point, I knew I wanted to be a cinematographer.
Did you
And
know
so,
anyone in Los Angeles, or are you just kind of moving out there literally all by yourself?
I knew a handful of people because I'd done
Uh-huh.
an internship in LA, and a few of those
Okay.
people had stayed. But
Gotcha.
really, no one that was going to be able to get me work, and no one that was going
Yeah.
to be able to help me really figure out how to move through the industry.
Mhm.
I had one friend who has been just like this. There's a cinematographer named Sean Conity who I reached out to before I moved to LA, and I had worked underneath him on a project when I was a student,
Mhm.
and he had gone to USC Film School, and he's a really successful commercial cinematographer, and we've become really good friends since. And he was somebody who was really helpful in the process. But in terms of moving out here and having a community, or having, there were a handful of people who I'd known from this program I did as a senior in college. But
Sure.
and I'm still friends with a lot of those people, and a lot of them still live in LA. But I didn't really have any true industry contacts.
Okay.
And so a lot of what I started doing in the very beginning was using like Craigslist and Mandy
Mhm.
and sort of those kind of job posting websites, stuff like
Yeah.
Staff Me Up and stuff like that.
Sure.
And you'll find a lot of unique and interesting
Oh,
people on those websites, and
I believe
I
it.
I learned a lot in the process. But I booked my first movie off of a Mandy post, and
Mhm.
it was a crazy experience. And I think I shot my first feature within the first year of being in LA, and that was a really good sign. It was a messy project. We were working 6-day weeks, and it was long hours, and there were things on that movie that were done illegally because I didn't know the labor laws, and I didn't know, how much I could stand up for the crew. And but we
Mhm.
made some really beautiful images and made a really beautiful looking film. And some of those core collaborators on that movie are still people I'm working with today. And even my gaffer from that movie and my first
Mhm.
AC, um, one of the first ACs I work with today worked on that movie, and literally worked with them 2 days ago.
Wow.
So, and that was 10 years ago. So
Mhm.
you really do meet some great people in the process. And then really it was just doing work like, doing indie features, doing commercials, doing music videos. And each of those was its own process and involved networking and reaching out and trial and error. But a lot of what I, found along the way is you have to make the kind of work you want.
And then you touched on a little bit, but how do you go about continue to get jobs as a cinematographer? Like, I don't know if you have an agent, or I know you said you kind of applied for them on Craigslist and stuff like that, or I'm sure now maybe some jobs call you. What does that look like now compared to the early
Yeah.
days?
So, I recommend to students like don't do what I did. Like I spent too much time trying to sort of like find good stuff online. And the reality
Mhm.
was you can occasionally find good jobs in that kind of world, but in general, the best way to get good work is to get to know good people who make
Mhm.
good work and find your tribe. And so a lot of what I do and how a lot of work comes to me now, it's been a mixture of recommendations, producers I've worked with that recommended me to directors, directors I've worked with recommending me to other directors, cinematographers that are friends of mine who step off of a job or can't commit to a job, and they might throw my name up. And then I do have an agent, and
Okay.
so Saul was an example of a project that came to
Mhm.
me because they reached out to my agent and were asking, "Hey, do
Well,
you
that's
have
cool.
any DPs who you think might be a good fit for this?" And he gave them a list, and I was on that list. Um, but a lot of the work is still coming from friends. The last movie I
Mhm.
shot is a director that I met because of a producer I had shot shorts for years ago. And then I reached out to that producer and to reconnect for coffee, and she was producing a movie at the time, and she said, "We're actually looking for a cinematographer." And then said the director liked my work and asked if I wanted to interview. And so I interviewed for the movie, booked the movie, we shot that, and then About a year and a half, 2 years later, we did our second movie together. That director and I, her name is Mercedes Bryce Morgan.
Wow.
So it really is, it is a result of friends and relationships you make along the way. And some work comes from agents, but a lot of it is, ultimately an agent can put you into the room, but you still have to
Hmm.
book the job.
Oh, yeah, of
You
course.
still have to.
Hmm.
Um, so it really just comes in a variety of ways.
Had you seen any of the movies before? And did you know how you wanted it shot kind of ahead of time, like when news first came of the job, or did you kind of just get there and feel it out?
Yeah, so I had seen the very first Saw film I had seen
Okay,
when I was in high school.
gotcha.
And it made it, and I grew up in a pretty like conservative, sheltered kind of environment. And so
Hmm.
I had really pushed to watch that movie. And this was back in the Blockbuster days. So
Okay,
I rented it and
yeah,
I loved it. And it really made an impression on me. And so when I interviewed for Saw 10, I was excited about the opportunity of being a part of that world and being able to
yeah,
create images within that world. And I think I'd seen one, two, and three, and then I went to college after that and just kind of lost
sure, yeah.
connection with the franchise. So when I
Hmm.
booked the movie, I actually went back and rewatched one, two, three, and six because Kevin said, of the Saw movies, these are the ones that are going to be relevant for Saw 10. So I
Gotcha.
watched those, and I have seen all of them since, but I kind of
Hmm.
focused my energy on those movies.
Sure.
And then we were really trying to find ways. Kevin and I, from the very beginning, we connected over the fact that we wanted Saw 10 to kind of bring the audience back to the world of Saw 1 and Saw 2. And we wanted
Hmm.
it to feel, you know, we wanted to feel rugged and dirty and
Yes.
textural and gritty like those early films. And we also wanted to bring the color palettes of those movies into Saw 10. And so we that was like an early conversation. We knew that, Saw is very much about darkness, grittiness, and also it's something that's designed to feel we always describe it as like you should feel like you want a tetanus shot after you watch it.
Yeah.
So it is something that it's very expressive and it draws from the language of giallo horror films. So these
Mhm.
Italian horror films um, that are very expressive and they have bold color choices and really dynamic camera movement. And so we wanted to bring both of those worlds back together. We still wanted to make it modern. We still want to make it our own. And one
Mhm.
of the ways we went about doing that was designing, uh, you know, in the early Saw films, there's a fairly monochromatic color palette. Um, I wanted us to sort of I wanted us to visually touch those colors, but also do it in a way that felt more three-dimensional, where there was a little more depth to the image. And I still
Right.
wanted us to be able to use darkness and contrast, and then also very expressive, subjective camera movement that makes you feel like, as a viewer, you're a part of being inside of the traps. And so we
Mhm.
were going back to basics in a lot of ways on making the movie. We wanted the traps to be more simplistic. We wanted them to feel more like stuff John could make with his hands. And
Yeah.
also, Saw 10 is very much a character study of John Kramer, and then it
Mhm.
turns into this sort of, it sort of starts as a character study, moves into these abductions, and then moves into this trap sort of space. And so we were actually quite nervous that the audience wouldn't want to stick with the movie if there was only one trap in the first 40 minutes, which there is.
Mhm.
But ultimately the strength of Tobin Bell as a performer and the fact that this is the first movie that really centers him as a human, not just
Yeah.
as this mythical figure,
Mhm.
um, we felt like that, that would carry the audience along. And so we were both trying to present this sort of intimate experience with John Kramer, but then also still get those low angles that show Jigsaw as a very mythical figure.
Mhm.
And there's big themes of good and evil, right and wrong, morality,
Yes.
fate, and all these sort of bigger themes that are part of that universe. And specifically in this film, we're playing with the idea of like, there's the medical scare, health scare,
Mhm.
the scamming sort of aspect, and sort of like the duplicitousness of things, that things are not always what they seem. And so there's an arc in the movie in terms of color palette and tone, but we didn't know how we were going to do that right away. I spent about 10 weeks in Mexico City prepping the movie, and then we shot. And so in the course of that, we defined a lot of what the traps were. There were initial ideas and initial previs, but those had to be fleshed out and then tested because
Mhm.
really the traps you're shooting them mostly in like a day and a half to 2 days at most.
Okay.
But you're shooting them in about a day. So it's all those prosthetic pieces, all the,
Mhm.
stunts work, all of everything involved with it. It's a lot, it's every department, it's wardrobe, makeup,
Mhm.
everyone's involved. All of that has to kind of be designed and figured out in advance. So you're not spending production money, paying an entire crew to while you're having, oh no, these rubber handcuffs aren't working, or oh
Mhm.
no, something is falling apart. So we tested most of the traps 2 to 3 times, sometimes 4 times. Gabriella's trap was the hardest, I would say,
Mhm.
to pull off, just because it involves someone being lifted off the ground, and then there's a lot of movement in the air. And so we're using a techno crane to
Yeah.
move the camera around. We're using stunt teams to rig her and pull her up. We're having to do a lot of lighting effects. And it's just very difficult to work with someone in the air. So, but all of them had their own unique challenges. I mean, the bloodboarding trap is, that's a very difficult trap to figure out. How do you shoot a child
Yeah.
being completely covered in blood? And, there's no one's figured this out before, that
Mhm.
as far as we had the answers. So we were very much figuring it out as we went in pre-production. And then by the time that we were shooting, a lot of it was figured out. And we would still, you know, on the day of shooting, we would still have a lot of work and a lot to figure out. But in general, we had a pretty strong game plan going in, and it was about executing it at that point. Worked
Mhm.
with all locals. The only people that came in from the US were the actors, myself, the production designer, the director, and our prosthetics team, which was this company called Fractured Effects. And they did a great job on our film. And the prosthetics look amazing because they're, really, really talented professionals. And we're very much, we're aware of what the other Saw movies are, but we want our film to both, you know, pay homage to those films, but then also be very much its own thing. And I think that's a result of all the collaborators on the film. And ultimately, Kevin was a great leader. He knew the Saw
Mhm.
franchise more than probably any other person. He's cut 5 or 6 of them.
Mhm.
Well, now he's cut 6 or 7 of them, I think, because he cut 1 through 5 and then he cut 10. And I think he had a hand in cutting, he might have cut Jigsaw as well.
Okay.
So Kevin really knows the franchise. He knows what makes it work. He knows, when you're setting the traps up, you need to make the stakes very clear to the audience so that
Mhm.
as the trap unfolds, the audience is able to take the information they've digested and then actually, start to wonder about what they would do and also watch this character, go through this. And we were trying to do stuff where we were putting the audience right into the action. So it's using stuff like putting a camera inside the tube to see the eyeball,
Mhm.
and that sort of stuff. So it was a lot of fun to design, and yeah, really couldn't have asked for a better leader or collaborator than Kevin.
What were some of the other challenges of filming the movie Saw?
I think the biggest challenge is the same challenge you face on every movie, which is how do you tell a great story, and how do
Mhm.
you tell a story that makes you want to keep watching? And so in the case of Saw, we know that the audiences are there for the traps. We know that the audiences show up because they want to see what's going to unfold with these characters. Our goal, though, was to make it less of a film that feels like we're just jumping from a trap to a trap, and actually create emotional tension there so that you care about the characters, you care about John, you care about what happens there, that you actually invest in this story emotionally. And I think that's something that's difficult to do. There's a bit of magic involved in that, and there's a bit of unknown involved in that. The greatest challenge in general was, the traps shooting very quickly, um making sure all the elements worked. I think in general I don't remember, we ended up finishing on schedule, on budget, within time. So most of the challenges were day of just the difficulty of actually pulling off sequences. um there, it's and like for instance, a trap like the bloodboarding trap,
Yeah.
we're using a stunt double who was made up to look like Tobin Bell and covering his eyes with prosthetics in order to
Mhm.
capture some of those shots. And you have to figure out, how do you marry using a stunt double with the actual actor. You have to keep your actors safe because, Tobin Bell is not a young, he's not a young man anymore, and you have to
Yeah.
make sure that you treat him. But I mean, the guy is. I hope I have the energy he has when I'm his age because he was up doing our night shoots, would do a
Mhm.
jig before jumping into some of these sequences. So really, has like a vibrant energy, but you can't bloodboard Tobin Bell,
Yeah, exactly. You can't
So you
bloodboard
have
an
to,
80-year-old.
yeah, so you have to sell that. And so I think figuring out a lot of those sells and then actually just getting into it and shooting it was both a lot of fun and really challenging. And then
Mhm.
some of the greatest challenges of the movie actually were not the filmmaking process
Okay.
involving making, shooting the sequences. A lot of the challenge of it was we were shooting in Mexico City, so there were
Mhm.
language barriers
Yeah.
between the crew and myself, and we navigated those really well, but those still create challenges along the way. And it's just the nature of making a film where you hire an American DP and you hire a Mexican crew, and
Mhm.
we had translators and we still figured everything out. But and my crew was really fantastic, and frankly, like I'm really lucky that I had them, and I don't think we would have made this movie wouldn't have looked like it did if we hadn't shot in Mexico City and had such a phenomenal crew. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just us all navigating our language barriers and
Mhm.
navigating that we were working with a team that had never really made a Saw film before, other than Kevin. So, we were all kind of getting up to speed and coming on board and figuring out how to make this a great film. And I had personal challenges involving getting COVID on the movie and
Mhm.
some food poisoning, but as an American in Mexico, it kind of, inevitable that you're going to get some food poisoning. So,
Yeah.
I was operating on the movie for 4 of 6 weeks. And then once I got COVID, I started working out of a trailer and I was
Okay.
just looking at monitors and communicating with my crew. And then we ended up shutting down for a little bit because some more people tested positive. And so we had to shut down for like 5 days, but then we came back and finished out the movie. So yeah, we really, I mean, the challenges are to capture the language and feel of Saw, which is, very heightened camera movement. We're doing whip pans, snap zooms. We're twisting the camera and these sort of rotating images and doing, those are very technical shots. But luckily I had an amazing team and great leaders. So we're genuinely we were able to, I don't think there was anything we tried to do that we weren't able to quite do. And some of it's just very time consuming and labor intensive. And, we shot a full day inside of the operating theater where John gets his brain surgery, and it's just there's a lot of reflections with glass that you're having to deal with, and there's a lot of it's just a lot of coverage as well. So because that's a scene where you're setting up all the major characters in the movie. So it's doing that kind of thing and then doing all these sort of technical style of shots that ends up being some of the most challenging things.
And how long were some of the shooting days on Saw?
They're the same as most films. So,
Okay.
we 12-hour days is
Mhm.
typical on when you shoot. Sometimes you go over. On this movie, we actually shot 6-day weeks. So,
Okay.
we weren't really able to go over because if we went over on one day, it would punt our start time on the next day, and that would roll back, and then eventually it would eat into our turnaround times. So, we weren't really able to go over that. So we were managed to shoot out all of our material in those 12 hours. Most of the interior night work was done day for night. So we blacked out the entire trap space, that whole huge warehouse. We
Okay.
blacked that out entirely. And then we were able to, all the lighting in there, we controlled remotely with LED. So I had a dimmer board op, and then I would communicate with him and we would change the color and the intensity of all the fixtures in the space. So that gave us flexibility to be able to shoot during the day and not actually have to shoot at night. Because shooting at night can be quite challenging. You start at
Mhm.
5 p.m. and end at 5 a.m. and it becomes a challenge with your schedule and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think on this the latest we ever went was like 1 or 2 a.m. and
Okay.
just doing, they're called splits, but where you split the day between day and night in order to capture something. But in general, because of turnaround times, by the beginning of the next week, you got to start fresh. So you usually try to like start with your day work, end the week with your, move into splits and then end your week with your night work. And then you roll back to daytime and for the start of the next week. That's typically how films are scheduled, which is why there's been conversation in the US about, getting rid of, they call them Fraturdays because it's like Friday nights into Saturday, but then, your recovery time is basically that 5 a.m. when you wrap on Saturday morning until Monday morning at 5 a.m. So it can be pretty brutal on your body, but it's just part of the industry.
Gotcha. And then in another interview, you talked about a shot of Billy on the tricycle where you had to mount the camera on like a speed rail to capture the shot. What was the thought process there, and were there any other kind of unique shots that you filmed there?
Yeah, so Kevin and I wanted every trap to be shot uniquely. And so we
Okay.
designed a specific color palette for every trap and sort of took this approach that um, all of the traps were on circuit timers. And so every time a trap started or stopped, the lights would turn on or shut off,
Gotcha.
correlating with the trap. So that's how we ended up getting, the Mateo's brain surgery trap is blue and green, which harks back to the first Saw film. Gabriella's trap is predominantly red and orange, and there's a little bit of green mixed in the background. The bloodboarding trap, we flip back to this sort of steel blue lighting with like a red uplight, and it kind of harks back to the very beginning of the film. And I also knew blood would read better in the blue than it would in any of our other colors. So we kind of designed lighting that would be unique to each trap. And then within that, we also start each trap with some sort of big dynamic camera movement, whether it's seeing Mateo, the doors swing open and the
Mhm.
camera pushes in violently, lands on his face. And so one of the ways we wanted to approach, you know, there's a lot of different ways we're approaching the visual techniques. Some of it is using these, they're very Saw, typical of a Saw movie, but we're using these like flash frame, stutter frame sort of images where we're shooting low exposure, so for 6 frames a second, which gives it kind of sped up feeling. And
Mhm.
then we're also lowering the shutter speed, so there's like this whipping feeling to that. We brought back the circular dolly track where we're whipping around characters. We're doing snap zooms in on characters. We're doing, techno crane moves down in because we want to create a heightened energy. Even with the finger brake, I used what's called a lambda head in order to do like a full like rotational twist to
Okay.
capture the finger brake where the camera moves with it. Or taking the camera and putting it into the tube in order to see what the eyeball is seeing, or actually like looking through a
Mhm.
tube to see the character's eye. So with each of the traps, we're doing some range of unique camera movement, um, which we just had a lot of fun doing. But in terms of the Billy tricycle shot, that was something Kevin and I talked about because we were trying to figure out how to show Billy, and we knew like when Billy arrived on screen, it was a big moment for us. It's a big moment for the audience. The audience is
Yeah.
gonna be like, "Oh fuck, it's Billy."
Yeah,
And
definitely.
so, we wanted it to be a big reveal. And it is theatrical in the sense that Kramer is a theatrical character. He designs these traps for these people in order to test their moral stamina and also, put them in these moral dilemmas. Like he wears a robe, he uses a puppet in these trap devices. So for us, we felt like it's something where we could establish Billy in a pretty loud sort of dynamic way, with his light popping on and we see Billy. And then he starts to slowly like cycle and creak
Mhm.
his way out. And so I don't remember if Kevin or I came up with the idea, but it was just something we were talking about that we thought would be really like interesting and weird and funny. Because I think one of the things that's fun about Saw is like it does sort of, it's a bit gallows humor, so it like deals with like dark themes and entertaining and funny ways at times. And Billy is like, one of those things that does that so well. And so we came up with this idea of like, what if we see the medical devices on the back and we just sit with those and follow them in. So we built like a little speed rail rig that attached to the tricycle, and then we were able to attach a camera to that and wheel it around and
Yeah, it's
kind
really
of
cool.
move it. But yeah, so yeah, we did a lot of those sort of things. Even with the brain surgery trap,
Mhm.
we were, we had to shoot that out in a very quick amount of time. And I had a couple operators that Kevin was overseeing where the cameras were going. And I saw the images and I was like, I love the lighting. I know what we're getting. I'm going to jump in and start shooting stutter frames of this these like flash frames of the brain. And so I took
Mhm.
my personal camera and just I started doing what's called lens whacking, where you take the lens off of the mount and you start dipping it around, and you get these light leaks that dip through the lens and into the camera. And so I used that to like added zooms and focus pulls and stuff, and that creates some of these really dynamic sort of intense flashes that we cut
Sure.
to of like, the brain getting cut into and stuff like that.
They use some of the shots that you were just describing, like from your own personal camera.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, how cool is that? Like your cameras.
yeah, yeah. I have like we shot the movie on the Sony Venice, and then I own like a little Blackmagic 6K camera, which is like,
Okay.
it's about the cheapest cinema camera you could buy. I think they're like $2,000 or something like that. You got to kit them out and everything. But yeah, I was able to use that camera to shoot. I sort of treat it like a cinematic GoPro. And so I was able to use it to capture those sort of pieces and even capture some stuff of Gabriella's hands, as we were shooting on other cameras. But even the shot of John, where the camera is kind of looking down the seesaw at John's face, where he's like
Yeah.
struggling as the blood is like coming across him, that we just rigged my camera up to the seesaw, and it's because it's a really small camera, about a DSLR sized.
Okay.
And it's not that we couldn't have rigged a Venice onto the seesaw, but it would have taken a lot more time. And so it's really just having that camera available to kind of throw in at the last minute and find like another frame or another kind of thing that we can add. And yeah, it was fun to be able to do that. And also it means that, oh, I have two operators already shooting. I can get a little more footage. And I like operating, but when you have two cameras going, it's good to be able to sit and make sure the lighting works for both cameras and oversee the photography that way. But I genuinely like operating. So when all those things are singing and working, I'll jump in and find other things myself. And that just helps make the edit stronger. And Saw is a very cutty movie, so
Yeah.
you need a lot of material in order to actually create the level of intensity that happens with this cut, 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 cut. But ultimately, like Kevin cut the movie. He's a great storyteller and a great editor, and he also knows the world of Saw. And so,
Mhm.
Kevin doesn't. He's not just cutting to cut. Kevin is cutting to show you something, and to make something work. So
How would you best describe the grind of being a cinematographer?
I think, it's a very uncertain and uneven career path. You have
Mhm.
these moments of that feel like in a lot some people describe it as going to war. Some I like to think about it like sports in the sense of, you go in for a season, and you have this very intense season of time where you're making something, where you're part of a team and you're all bringing all these ideas and all these unique personalities together, and then you're there doing that thing for however long it is, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and you all kind of get into the same rhythm and into a little family, and you make this thing. Then you just disappear, and sometimes you never see those people again. And sometimes, in the case of Saw, like I worked with crew that I'd worked with on another movie I did in Mexico City probably 5 or 6 years ago. And so we've all grown and we've all changed and we've all learned a lot and grown as people. But it was great to be able to work with people I'd already worked with. And so there is a bit of a nomadicness to the lifestyle, because you go where the movie shoots and you're
Mhm.
away from home, sometimes 3 to 5 months at a time. And um, yeah, it's a um, but it's also how movies get made. So it is something where like I very intensely do something, and then I have times where I'm not working for a couple months at a time because
Yeah.
there's not a movie happening. And in those times, I'm testing and I'm reading and I'm like discovering other ways of doing things, or I'm shooting music videos and short films and
Mhm.
commercials. And those are a way to test new gear, work with new crew, make some money. And
Sure.
so you do get to actually like dance between those, but you're freelance, you don't have any stability in terms of
Mhm.
a regular time or a regular salary. It very much is gig, based on each gig that you book and each gig that you shoot. So there's a lot of self-determination involved, and that you have to kind of be able to navigate those slower seasons, and stay positive and take care of yourself and be ready for when the call happens.